the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this episode, a special preview interview with one of the many outstanding thought leaders and change makers taking the stage for the RCC Store conference on May 31st. David Shing, also known as Shingy, is an Australian futurist speaker, creative director, strategic digital consultant, and entrepreneur. Shingy has spent most of his adult life in the digital world working for both large and small creative companies globally while co-authoring several technology-related patents. We chat about his eclectic background, a hint of the knowledge and insights he'll be dropping on the main stage at Store, and a quick two-start, one-stop advice for retailers and retail industry insiders. Let's listen in now. Shingy, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this morning?
Michael, thanks for having me, mate. I'm great. Thanks for asking.
Where am I finding you today?
New York.
New York. Now, by the sound of your accent, you're not a native born and raised New Yorker. So tell me a little bit about where you're from and a little bit about your background.
You don't think this is the back hills of New York or something like that, brother?
It was not one I've experienced yet. There's always a possibility, you know.
No, I'm from Oz, and my background is design. I mean, I grew up in the bush of Australia. Mm-hmm. I'm one of 10 kids. I grew up at a Chinese restaurant, very much a working family of chefs, and I wanted to get the hell away from that and all of my family. So I studied design and helped invent some internet technology way back in the day and helped move a company from Australia to New York City, which feels like 1,000 years ago. But, you know, in what they would call today Web 1, my friend.
Tell me a little bit more about that, because I was looking at your background. You and I have a not dissimilar background. I launched e-commerce for Hudson's Bay and retailers back in 97. I sold the first pair of jeans online for Levi's in the world, and AOL was a partner of mine back in the day. And tell me about your background and how you got into that.
How beautiful. So my background, as I said, is in design, but I really care about sort of UX, UI as a sort of formal interest in the interwebs back in the day. Mm-hmm. And the company that we started was all about building websites, which sounds like a remarkably useful pedestrian tool today. But back in the late 90s, it was very, very, very difficult to build, and you had to raise a lot of money to do it. And that company didn't succeed, but the technology went on to sort of help. I think I've got 6 patents around that internet technology, which is all about building website-y stuff. And what happened was that I was on my way to London for the second time, and an old friend of mine he's actually my first employee in New York, was an executive at AOL, and he asked me to come along and see if we could help launch a bunch of territories called the New Geographies. And so I joined him as his head of media in Europe, looking after all these launches, and then ultimately I took over marketing as well. So I'd been head of media and marketing of Europe for a few years for AOL, and then I invented this gig called, this evangelism gig, which people wanted to call me an evangelist, and I said, well, screw that, I'll call myself the digital prophet.
Yeah,
which people either love or loathe, and look, I get it. I'm pretty self-aware, dude.
Were you naturally drawn into? I remember back in the day, I saw it as an opportunity. I was doing brand management at Black & Decker, but I saw the internet. I bought a book on Amazon. I said, hey, this could really be something. How are you? There's many things someone as obviously talented and creative as yourself could have done. How are you drawn into this part of the world and in the internet ecosystem? Was it just this opportunity of
great question?
This is growing. This is blowing up. I think I'm going to chase this one down. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and you'd think I'd be, smart enough to sort of chase it down. It didn't. I fell into it by accident, and why I say that is that I was the last school of classically trained graphic design. So if you want to talk about fonts and kerning and all of that good stuff, mate, I've done it. I've been there. I saw an industry change rapidly, and I'm talking like typesetting and bromides and all these things that we had back in the day, long gone. Pantone squeaky markers, all that stuff, and I had to self-teach computers, which is pretty easy to pick up, but then programming on computers isn't. So I got super curious about how to actually develop software, and just enough to be able to sort of mark up HTML and a little JavaScript back in the day, and that's about it. But what I was fascinated about was just the ability that the internet to be able to communicate in a way that felt incredibly democratized. And I was somebody who grew up with TV, and it wasn't until that culture for me, television was kind of a very blatant, passive experience. It wasn't something that really gives you this charisma, this energy of saying, how do I use it as communication? And I didn't grow up with AOL or anyone like that. You know, it was just really a tool to communicate, but something that was really quite lovely because it allowed you to have this sort of multi-path communication. You know, let's talk about CB radios back in the day, but something that felt like it was interactive in real time. And I thought there is an opportunity here. But what was happening was there wasn't a mass communication device, meaning there was the advent of a couple of search engines, but there wasn't a lot to be found. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, web design was something that I was incredibly passionate about, and I thought that should have been democratized and people should have access to be able to build websites out because it was incredibly hard. It was software-based, but why not through browser? But the internet itself has just been this, you know, this proper portal to opening up the entire world. And what I mean by that, and it sounds really naive and poetic when I say that, but the truth is it allowed the whole world to feel so much smaller. And it's also allowed a generation of kids to feel like they have incredible breadth of information, but they could be quite shallow in their knowledge. And so there's this interesting sort of impasse that's happening, and I find it to be fascinating. So long story long to say that I felt asked backwards into it, but I'm thrilled because the interactivity and the ability to say that creativity can thrive in an environment that feels like it's through a screen from somebody who's sort of grew up analog was just enchanting to me. But also I haven't had a TV. I haven't had a TV since I moved to America. And so you know, I grew up with 3 channels of television. It was all kind of very dinky. By midnight, it was turned off.
Yeah,
came to America.
Pattern. You see the test pattern. My wife and I were talking about that last week as it was 3 a.m. and I was watching Netflix. Remember the day when it just flicked a test pattern? It was crazy.
But also understand that, you know, when I came to New York, there was like 99 channels of television. None of it was good. And so I just realized that wasn't for me. And so I really went into the internet.
Pretty sketchy stuff from my recollection of the 90s on New York television too. It was pretty indie stuff.
Oh, it's just not that great, mate. 99 channels of rubbish, and all you do is frequency bumping into the things you care about. Like, you know, for me, it's music and food and whatever, things that are pretty obvious. But what's amazing is that that's the proliferation of internet. And the thing that I found about it is that it just gave me this massive trust. I could trust that the things that I'm finding in there was super curious. It was never ending. There was this two-way communication. There was ability to just feel like you're a part of a community at any time of the day, any essence. And the only challenge at that point was just connectivity. I mean, you know, wireless was pretty rubbish. You know, connected cable was nice. It hasn't been until the last, I don't know, in my mind, the last 10 years that it's just been phenomenal.
Yeah. We always saw the broadband, as we used to call it then, the kind of the accelerant or the enabler, the unlock, really.
Big time.
The internet, right?
Michael, I have not thought about this stuff for a long time, man.
I know.
You're asking me questions about a time that I have to dig into my grey matter because, dude, it is dark and stormy in there, and I haven't been out there to check that weather out for quite some time because I take it for granted, mate. I turn on my phone and the thing works, and you know, there's about 8 apps that I use that I give a rat's about, and then the rest of it kind of all happens. But I'm very curious about the amount of time that people spend on those devices, and it bothers me.
No kidding. Well, let's dive into Flash. How you build out Flash websites? I'm kidding.
Please bring back Macromedia. Please.
Yeah, there's one for the history books. All right, so listeners, we're not going into the history book. Before I ask you about what you're going to chat about on the stage at Store, I want to follow up one element for you because we've got a little bit of time. At the end of the day, the halcyon days of the internet are much of what you described. This platform that unified people around the world, unified kids around the world. It opened up so many possibilities. It lately, particularly, some parts social media, some parts other, has had a very, very dark side to it. And it's not like we can put the toothpaste back in the tube, but on a net benefit basis, do you think we're still ahead with internet connectivity and social media than we are from its deficits and its challenges? Are we still ahead of the game? And can we get farther ahead than we are today?
Michael, I'm euphoric about it. And why I would say that is that, you know, I stand behind the belief that, you know, good will always win over evil. And working with somebody like AOL back in the day, we fought many of those battles, and a lot of those battles are actually truncated before you see the evil, to be frank. There's some good and evil in everything that we do. So as much as you try and sort of mask it, it's going to come. but I hope it trumps. But here's the other thing that's really interesting. A friend of mine gave me some advice a long time ago when the internet wasn't loving me so much and I was being hated on. So I was really a victim of being bullied, and particularly across Twitter at the time. And I think I retired from Twitter actively really giving a rat's about publishing around 2014, 15, something like that. He said, look, just go where you're celebrated, dude.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's incredible advice for two reasons. One, you can now choose to go where you are celebrated, or two, you can stay and sit in the dogfight if you got a dog in the ring, but who cares for that?
Right.
So I would say that, yes. Now, if we were to have this conversation over a big fat glass of wine and we're together at Canoe or something in Toronto, I would sort of also go down the rabbit's warren of, where we're going, particularly with these new technologies, is that not all of it's great.
Yeah.
And it's less about the evilness. It's just about the attention of it all and what it's doing to our interpersonal interconnection, human skills. I'm not necessarily a massive fan of, so I'm trying to protect that, one for me as a data point of one, and for others around me. So, because part of my job is to not just sort of seek out these interesting ideas, but also the relationship we as humans have with technology and what those behaviors are going to do. And so as somebody who travels and speaks and has the ability to sort of, I have a rigorous consulting business too where I get into the weeds, but when I pontificate and just think big, there is some real challenges that we have ahead of us. But I tend to say, well, let's not woe is me this. What's the positive of it? And one of the things I'm doing is that I'm speaking at this conference, as you know, in a couple of months, and I'm thrilled about it because retail is the cornerstone of still things that we do. Not all of us just jump on Amazon all day and just get the brown box ordered. As much as that went through the roof, local has also been an incredible trend, and all these other amazing things that happen in retail, which is how we still want to connect. It's not just all about single transaction moments. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, right on. Well, that's a good segue. Let's talk just briefly. Give people a hint of what you're already giving them a good flavor of the kind of caliber of discussion. But give us a hint about what you're going to be chatting about at Store in May 30, 31 at the big conference.
Chitting and chatting about, dude.
Chitting and chatting.
Oh, that is an amazing term. I want to use that. If you don't mind, I'm going to use that. I'm going to steal that from you, Michael. Chitting and chatting.
Common license to that.
I am hoping to be able to do like a year's worth of digital education in an hour or 45 minutes or whatever I've got.
Yep.
The truth is there's so much change. One, I want to kind of update us on where we are and what we're doing, but also, understand that there's technologies out there that have formed the new revolution. And the revolution I'm talking about, or the fourth industrial revolution, is powered by intelligence. So I think for probably the last 6 or 7 years, I've been saying that this is going to be the fourth industrial revolution, intelligence, and human or otherwise. And so how do we get there? What does it mean? And where are we going? And what are the evidence of it? And more importantly, are there opportunities? And that's where I find it to be fascinating. So if we ground it upon truth, there are some things that come in, particularly when we look at the hype cycle. The hype cycle is so fast that you need some context. So where do you play your bets, and where do you actually sit and understand what you want to do? Where are you going to play? And some of it is just really about digesting all of this change and understanding where you have permission to play and where you should experiment, where you should focus. And I'm going to talk about those sort of things, which is what's going on with behaviors, how we're connecting with technology, and what has that got to do with retail. And there's some things that I've seen, particularly around pandemic days. There are some particular trends that brands should definitely take advantage of. And I don't care whether you're small, large, B2B, B2C, it doesn't really matter. There are 3 things that I would recommend that people think about now engaging in. And these seem pretty obvious, but they're not, because they're not going to last. So one is convenience. I mean, Amazon has taught us that, 2 days is too long to get things delivered. But what does convenience mean from your lens and your point of view? That's one thing. The second thing I would say is comfort. What are the things that you do as a brand, whether you are directly in the purchase cycle or whether you're thinking about engaging with people and nurturing that relationship, et cetera, et cetera? What do you do that provides comfort? And the third thing is nostalgia. Nostalgia is very important because it relates to comfort and relates to convenience. But, I saw particularly in the middle of the pandemic that nostalgia was something that people really pondered. So bedtime reading went up. People went back to baking. I mean, these old school themes are really front and center. And we don't have a lot of time left to be able to capitalize upon those, but we do. We have a little bit more time. And the reason why I think that's important is that all brands have permission to play in those three sectors, but also we have to watch out for the next generation of kids that are coming. So everybody talked about millennial for the longest time, and now it's been Gen Z for the longest time. They're watching their TikToks and all that sort of rubbish.
Yep.
Sorry, all of that good stuff. And then the flip side of that is this Generation Alpha is coming.
Yes.
Now, what's amazing about that, by 2025, there will be 2 billion of them. So they're enormous.
Great.
It's an enormous audience. And what's crazy about that is that there was a survey done, I don't know, a couple of years ago about that generation, and the vast majority of them did not want to be called alpha. They wanted to be called founder. So that in itself as a statement tells you the attitude that's coming. So there are certain things that we need to sort of just be aware of and understand that because they're coming, how are you going to be at least prepared for them?
Yeah. It's interesting. I've heard the same thing. They basically want agency over their own cohort description, which is just a phenomenal idea. Just I've never heard of such a thing.
And it's also. I'm sorry. I'll just barge in there for one quick second, which is it's the most perfect time for that because of where we are in the world in terms of change and behaviors and the ability to be who you need to be and fluidity, et cetera, it comes as no surprise. And it's going to be pretty radical to see what that means.
Last question for you. 2 starts and 1 stop. I'm going to phrase it. Just a quick hit of advice because it sounds like you're going to be bringing the advice and dropping the knowledge on the stage here when you're here. So give me 2 starts and 1 stop. Quick advice to retailers listening about, from your perspective, consulting, speaking, and your background. 2 things they should start doing and 1 thing they should probably stop doing. Doesn't work or doesn't work anymore.
At the absolute top of the tree, the first thing anybody should do is just do a reconciliation of why they're doing it. And here's why I would say that, is that there's so much that I see in the marketplace where people talk about what they do and how they do it, and they forget about the why. And the why comes back because it's really hard, man. It's that point where you have to nasal gave. Everything comes from the why, not the what and the how. The what and the how are tactics. We love to run to shiny objects because we can justify them. But for me, it's the why. And in that part of the why, there are 3 things. So that's one thing. There are 3 things within any particularly brand storytelling that's going to help anybody, particularly when we're trying to have people in a retail category experience that, is build trust. And to do that, those 3 things you need to focus upon is brand story, which, I think most people do a reasonable job of that. Brand performance, which is the entire industry is focused on today. It's all about buy 1, get 1 free, 50% off, whatever the proposition is. It's all about performance, which I'm kind of over. And it feels way too much like DR, and it feels like the internet was built for that, but it wasn't. It was built for much more purpose. And the last piece that's incredibly difficult is feel. So what is your brand feel when it comes to the beautiful digiverse? I mean, you do it in physical, if you are a physical brand. So doing that in the digital space is incredibly important, because what most people do, brother, is they go and homogenize their brand across the platform of which is hot and shiny today, and they end up creating content that feels like everybody else's, and we end up where we are, which is kind of boring.
I guess that fits in as your stop making content that is, unthoughtful or unprincipled or unconnected to the brand message. Any comments, last comments on that you see?
No, you read me well, my friend, but I would say one other thing. If the goal of anything that you do, particularly when it comes to digital connection, that should have a surprise. Period. Full stop. Because if you're not, why are you building it? Do you want it to get passed on? Do you want people to tilt their head and think, I never expected that? I mean, that for me is the cornerstone of all of it. That's the secret ingredient. So that's my entire presentation. You guys don't have to come, but I'd like to see you in person.
Hey, I'm going to edit that part out.
What I'm going to.
No, I'm editing that part out. No, listen.
I would love to see people there. I can't wait to be in Toronto again. And look, man, as long as there's as long as the energy of that city, which is probably. It's got to be in the top 5 construction cities in the world outside of Asia. Yeah. It is unbelievable every time I go to Toronto, but yeah, all good stuff, brother.
Well, we're looking forward to being able to host you. You'll be on day 1, and you're going to bring us home. We're saving the best for last on that day. So thanks again for jumping on the mic now and giving us a bit of preview, and looking forward to meeting you in person and hearing your wisdom and thoughts live on the stage. So have a great rest of your week. And like I said, we'll see you in May.
Thanks so much, brother.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure to check out my other retail industry media properties, Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis, and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, consumer growth consultant, president of Emmy LeBlanc and Company Inc., Maven Media, and keynote speaker. If you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Safe travels, everyone.